Mr. Partridge, you're muted.
We have secrets. We're not going to let you know. Now, Russia, it's pretty amazing, but we got protests in Russia over basically kind of an authoritarian dictatorship. We had a horrific insurrection in the United States that appears as though people are just going to let happen. It's actually just mind-boggling. We had an attempt to overthrow the government in our own country, January 6th. Have you heard we have a pandemic? Have you heard that? We also have economic disaster, and yes, cases are going down, but a new shockingly dangerous case is coming from Britain that is, let's put it this way, listening to the doctors when they talk about it, they're terrified. I don't want to see them terrified. I was kind of like, oh, we just get through that. And Aaron brought up a good point that they might be going to take down Putin. The problem is Putin will use everything. The dictator of Russia. He's the democratically elected president. And what they do is they bring in people from other provinces in Russia into Moscow. St. Petersburg, the bigger cities where they have no connection with them. And they're going to kill them. Or this would be a rebellion. This is Navalny, the guy who's been sentenced for 2 years, who's against Putin's he's kind of scummy. But still, he's not Putin. So, with that, let's get back. This was in Winnipeg. And then I don't have the screen up here. So, the map is due today. And one thing different about Russia now is that the Biden administration is definitely not going to be pro-Putin, so that'll be a big difference. So the map is due today. I am going to sign chapters 13 chapters. All of the chapter 13s. Chapter 13, section 3 and 4, and there'll be a quiz on that. I put down Thursday, but I'll probably just drop the quiz on Thursday or Friday, so just do it over those couple days. Just a little 10, 12 questions. And we're going to have a test coming up here pretty soon. And so we'll probably do the beginnings of the Reformation and then do all the religious wars, and that'll be its own separate unit. So that's my plan. So I'll have a test probably next week, which ought to work out pretty good. And so remember, Magellan sailed around the world. Who convinced the king and queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, that the fastest way to go east to China was to go west? Cristoforo Colombo. Yeah, Columbus. To anglify it, that's Columbus. And am I recording?
You are recording, but you're not screen sharing.
Oh God! You just have demands on me.
That wasn't a demand. It was a notification.
Who thinks that was a demand? Everyone here does. I'm going to turn it off. I'm muting. I'm going to move. Am I moving? The other thing when I was trying to get the file, then you've done that where sometimes I forget everything else. I'm just trying to figure out how to get that stupid file squared away. And about Columbus, and that introduced slavery. He exaggerated their goal. We don't actually, when he died, we're not exactly sure what he knew. I will show you this map. That's a little bit of the map of what they knew, and you can see their islands here. But this is the map he had in his the map he had in clipped to the page of his journal. So let's go ahead and finish up exploration then. So we got Ferdinand Magellan. Let's get to the Treaty of Tordesillas. There'll be 1494 and also the 1511. I just didn't write that in. But the Treaty of Tordesillas would be basically where the Pope divided the world in two. It was, the Pope by then was under, and I mentioned this once before, kind of Spanish and French were fighting for the Pope here. And he basically just drew a line and said, actually the first line was right here. Give my line, right here. And he just basically said, okay, everything, any new lands east of this line, they go to Portugal. Any new lands west of this line, go to Spain. And of course, that's not going to happen. And it's totally disregarding the people who lived there. But then 10 years later, they moved it here. So Portugal remember Brazil, when Amerigo Vespucci was trying to follow the Gama's route and landed there. Like the sound effect for landing in Portugal? Pretty good, huh? So this gives you an idea about how quickly this happened, how word spread, and how the assumption was the great powers that Portugal would create in the Indian Ocean with Albuquerque getting there and setting up those trading communities, and then Spain moving into the New World. The assumption was they would dominate, and it was not long after that other countries began to step in. But for about 50 years, especially Spain, would make so much money off of the New World that they would become one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen, and in 100 years they would blow it all and on their way to a very steep decline. So that gives us a powerful lesson to understand that yes, you can be really powerful, and yes, you decline very quickly. And so the Spanish sent soldiers of fortune called conquistadors. Now, conquistadors were the second sons of nobility. In Britain, they would call them dandies. Okay, the second, third sons, they didn't get the inheritance, they didn't get the title, so they would go get their own. And so these were brutal, greedy men. Many of them were trained as soldiers. Many of the Spanish ones had been fighting for years against Muslims in Spain, trying to drive them out, and also in what is now Morocco. I guess it was in Morocco too. And their job was, they're going to go in and conquer these areas. It's going to be Cuba, other islands in the Caribbean, and conquer the American Indians that live there. And I put down Indians, but I should put down American Indians who live there and take this land. Okay, this is a very stylized picture of Cortez. But these are people, basically what Spain did is they did empire on the cheap. They're conquering for Spain, but they get to basically keep what they conquer. So another way to look at them is they're basically pirates. They're basically pirates. And this would be their motto. This would be, and this would go on to future colonization all the way to Britain in Africa. The U.S. would use similar ones when they took Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines going into the 20th century. God, glory, and gold. And so they're going to spread Christianity to the heathens. Fame and fortune, not just for them, but for Spain. And remember, these are the second sons, so if they get famous, not only, here's the big thing, they get glory. Yeah, sure, they might get that plantation in the New World, but you know what they really wanted? They wanted their own title of nobility back in Spain. So you'll see that a lot. There's going to be a lot of people, Spain, then France, but especially Britain, go to, let's say, the Caribbean, start one of these sugar plantations where they literally just chewed human beings up to get sugar, worked them to death, so they could go back to Britain and become like a gentleman. But then gold, let's be clear, they wanted to get rich. And with the ideology shifting in Europe, they could say this was all justified, we are deserving. And it kind of fits in with the Reformation, which we'll soon talk about. But those are the conquistadors. And I showed you that picture. And so one of the reasons when they went there, there's going to be all these rumors about what they found. And so there's going to be these glorious pictures of sea monsters and serpents and all these animals and that are under the water. And the great thing about it is, if you ever seen some of the underwater life, especially when you get down many thousands of feet deep, they're pretty crazy looking. So you can imagine how they would just assume all of these different creatures and animals under the water. But there's all these myths about what they would find. I should add, it just absolutely blew them away, though, what they actually did find. Here is, this is a drawing. This is actually of Spanish ships going into Cuba. And if you look at the way they drew American Indians, they're strong, they're muscular, and it's not just by the style of the Reformation. or the Renaissance. In fact, you can argue that a lot of what Michelangelo was doing was not just the Greeks, the Greek art or the Roman art, showing the body so fit and muscular. Remember the Sistine Chapel, the one where Jesus was just, Jesus is huge. The judgment, the way he drew him. But there's what they heard about American Indians. They just could not believe it. These incredibly muscular, strong, beautiful people. Which, of course, at first thought is, boy, could they do a lot of work for us. So there's a lot of horrific elements of this. So he's kind of copying that. And so they were pretty much in awe of them. And the problem of this is that you're in awe of people like this, makes it harder to conquer their land. And so you're going to get something, and I didn't type this down in, but part of the conquistadors is going to be part of a way to turn American Indians into more like savages. It's actually a weird dichotomy. People in Europe had never seen people as free as American Indians. And we'll come to this when we get to the Enlightenment. But they're going to start saying they're savages. They're horrible. And they'll do the same thing in Africa with stories about cannibals. Yes, there were a few cannibals. By the way, cannibalism bad. So you know, right? We understand that. Cannibalism bad. Everyone at home? Cannibalism bad. Unless you're really hungry. But that's on film. But they're going to say also they're headhunters and they're shrinking heads and things like this. So you're going to get all of these horrible stories by the 1600s to justify taking the land. You turn to the savages and they are heathens, they're not Christians, we can enslave them and steal their land. Oh, here's one more picture. Some of these early ones in the 1600s are really cool. But you can also tell them, wow. But then here are American Indians that have captured Europeans and were broiling them on spits and eating them. So the horrible cannibals who tortured people and ate them, destroyed them, brutal, awful people, which, by the way, I'm not saying there wasn't examples of various tribes attacking Europeans, but it's actually mostly the other way around. This is what we call, have you heard the great psychological term, projection? I do something bad, but I'll project my bad on you. Oh yeah, but you're out to get me. And this happens time after time after time. The bully then will try to turn that on somebody else. And here's more pictures. Look at the head of a conquistador, chopping up limbs, cutting them apart. And some of these pictures are absolutely gruesome. But you send this back, and you have this weird thing is, wow, they're so free, they're so amazing. Oh, they're brutal, horrible people. And so this will be kind of a contradiction. But it's ways to make them look worse. And they're supposed to be fighting over chunks of eating him. And then here, though, it's closer to the reality. Here are Spaniards on Cuba doing the same tribute system I told you yesterday. Remember I told you that have a hot spell of gold? You don't have it, what happens? They're cutting off the hand. That is a brutal, that was more the reality of what was going on. But if you can convince yourself that these people are animals, then why not do that? Because they'll do it to us. They'll do worse. Or they're not really human. We're not quite to that point yet. That idea did not exist. And by the way, don't think in terms of race. That was irrelevant. People did not think in terms of race. Yes, there were different people with different colored skins, but racism did not exist. That's going to be created. So with that, but here's a pretty good map of the early part of New Spain. And that is by 1550. Isn't that good? And so they had gone all the way up to here. And, oh, I forgot something. So they've gone all the way up into, on trading expeditions, all the way up to Newfoundland. By 1520, 1530, fishermen from England were landing on the coast of what is now like Massachusetts or New York, drying their fish before they went back. So there are all kinds of Europeans coming. There's all this globalization, but also the spreading of disease. And Give me a sec. Okay, so here we go. So, those conquistadors started coming, and I think you probably see the problem with the conquistadors coming here. Here's Hispaniola, which is Haiti today. And I told you what happened to the population of Arawak there yesterday. Here's Cuba. There are other islands that begin to take it eventually, like Jamaica here, the British would take it, a few other islands, Bahamas. The scale's a little off. And when they went to Florida, you notice how this is kind of vague here. It was so marshy, they thought it might be little islands. All the good land had been taken. And so as more and more conquistadors came, hoping to get rich, they said, we got to find other areas. Some tried to go into here, not a good place, other places, but they heard about a mighty empire here. And they thought, well, we can conquer that. Oh, and there's stories of gold, so much gold, it's like literally being poured down their buildings. There's so much gold. You probably know about this. We're talking about the Aztecs. And in 1521, Fernando Cortez, a very brutal but intelligent conquistador, he, on his own, violating the viceroy, which is kind of the governor of New Spain, which was basically Cuba and Hispaniola, violating orders, crossed over to the to what is the little town that would be Veracruz, and invaded the Aztec Empire. And the leader of this empire, this mighty empire in the center of Mexico, which actually the term, the Aztec, their land was Mexico, that was Mexico, was Montezuma II. And this was also a very brutal empire, which conquered the areas around, it conquered the tribes and made that part of their empire. They basically were practicing imperialism within Mexico. And it was a huge empire. They'd heard about the ships. In fact, they weren't seafaring people. And so as they saw it, as when they first saw the Spanish ships, they saw them as floating buildings, which I guess it kind of is. And so Cortez came, just 100 men, but the big thing Cortez, landed here and had to go up the mountains. So Tenochtitlan is the capital right here of the Aztec Empire. It had over 1 million people in it. Much of it was on lakes. They built these kind of reed rafts, and they lived on the lake there. The lake is not completely gone. The lake has now been basically filled in, and that's where Mexico City is. But this was bigger than probably any, or significantly bigger than any city in Europe. So the town itself, there were hundreds of thousands of people on the water, and then over 1 million people around it. And they controlled this massive area. By the way, I mentioned in that map we have the Mayans. The Mayan Empire had already fallen apart. And it wasn't really an empire, that's more a thing in terms of like city-states. And the Mayan Empire spread in this area right here. But probably killed them off in about 1100, 1200 AD, climate change. There's a little bit of shift in weather, and just as it got just slightly warmer in Northern Europe, this area basically got bone dry quickly. And it didn't take much. And I've been to a few Mayan ruins. In Belize, a place called Tulum right here. Mayan ruins are amazing. There's not many Aztec ruins left because the Spanish destroyed everything. They put their buildings on top of the old ruins to say we conquered. But they landed here, and he's violating the order. So basically, if he doesn't succeed, even if he escapes with his life, he could be in real trouble. So Cortez, okay, the rumor was that he had his ship burnt, so there's no retreat. Actually, what they did is they sunk their ships so they could bring them up when they got the stuff back, so no one would steal their ships. And they began to move overland. Now, there's lots of reasons how they're able to defeat the Aztecs. because the Aztecs had thousands of soldiers. They were well organized and well prepared, but they were brutal overlords of all kinds of tribes along the way. And so what they did is, first off, let's tell you what they had. First off, the big advantages they had were the horse. The horse was absolutely terrifying to the Aztecs. They had these big war horses. We talked about them with the knights had these horses. They had 19 horses. And they could not stop the horses. They're just these massive animals that were terrifying. And then crossbow, you notice this picture of the Aztecs, or this conquistadors right here? So you see the crossbow. But the one we mentioned before, the early muskets, the arquebuses. And the arquebuses weren't that accurate. Maybe 30, 40 yards accurate. Even then, it wasn't all that accurate. In fact, they wouldn't even fire one musket ball. They would put in like 3 or 4 musket balls, or just put in like a handful of rocks. So it'd be like a shotgun. But you know what made those so effective? No Aztec had ever heard anything that loud before. And it just blew them away. Just, you gotta be kidding. But the big thing, how they're able to beat the Aztecs who outnumbered them, they got allies. They got other tribes and convinced them, join us and we can beat your overlords. Cortez made all kinds of deals that he would break. Cortez broke every deal. And this is going to be the classic method of conquest that the Romans did, everybody did. We talked about this with Julius Caesar. Divide and conquer. So divided up the various tribes here, defeated the biggest one, and then just absorbed the rest. So, allies did it. So when they first arrived there, there's all kinds of story that Montezuma thought it was a returning god, and all kinds of, as it turns out, that's probably not true. Montezuma probably knows exactly what's happening here. These are horrible invaders that we can't figure out, and we just give them some stuff, maybe they'll leave. The problem is you give them some stuff, they stayed. And they stayed, they even imprisoned Montezuma. I think I have the picture of this. They imprisoned Montezuma, and these are a couple of Spanish pictures of it. They had Montezuma tied up, and they murdered Montezuma. The Aztecs ran him out of they ran him out of Tenochtitlan. Oh, they thought, there's a story, I should mention this real fast. There is a story that the Aztecs thought it was their god, Quetzalcoatl, who the story was kind of half dragon, half white man. And I've heard this story, you might have heard this story, I was told this in college, I've read books about that. As it appears, that was purely made up 100 years after the fact. There was no real myth of Quetzalcoatl. It's one of those, boy, that's a good story, let's say he thought he was a god. No, as it turned out, we know who these people are. They're bad news. After they killed Montezuma, they ran the Spanish and their allies out. Cortez rolled the die and attacked one more time. And when he came back, they literally could walk on the bodies. What happened? Yeah, disease killed them all. Probably the common cold, measles, and measles killed them all. Killed them all. All the Aztecs, or not all, but about 90% gone. And so what resistance they could have, was pretty futile. You can imagine how disheartening that would be. Why do these dirty, hairy people survive and we die? And so those who remained were totally broken. And that allowed for the Spanish conquest. And that is where the Aztecs were captured, or their territory, Mexico, surrenders. And here's the surrender to Cortez. Disease combined with some intelligent use of divide and conquer, but let's get to the biggie. Brutality. Brutal force. And that's how that part of New Spain happened. That's how they got Mexico and moved from there. And wherever the Spanish went, disease followed. Wherever they went, disease followed. Another one would be the Incas. Another conquistador a decade later, same deal. They went into the Isthmus of Panama, conquistadors were spreading out, and they heard about this mighty empire in South America. And Francisco Pizarro, with just a few hundred men, did the same thing to the Incas. The leader of the Incas, and I always, I've heard it pronounced, but I screw it up. That's one thing about phonetically spelled word. Atahalpa? What do you think? I know that's not. You want to try it? Anyone want to try it? Problem with being, okay, it's my vernacular. I speak English. I speak Montana English. Born and raised here, eh? Okay, why did I turn into a hick? Okay, so, but it's hard to see because we put our accents where we want to put our accents. So that's probably I know a little bit of Spanish, and when I was in Mexico and Costa Rica, I kept doing the accent wrong, and they just, I'm sorry, you're really trying. I like your language, it's really awesome, but. And then the other thing is that they realize, fortunately, most people there realize he can't speak Spanish, so they speak English. I know I should probably practice, but I'm asking to be thankful. Okay, the same thing happened. We're not going to go into the details about how the Incas fell, but disease and just blatant brutality. Pizarro rode in, captured Atahalpa. He did the same thing. Captured him, held him hostage, beat off repeated attacks, and the Incas just died by disease. And you can imagine what happened. When they sent down, the Incas had just an incredible road network along the Andes Mountains. When they sent runners for help, they spread the disease. And so the Spanish could conquer then basically an empire of mostly dead. But think how disillusioned that must have been. And that also, remember one of the first things I said was to spread Christianity? That also made for converts. Because you could imagine how people are like, my religion must not work. There must be something special in that Christianity for the reason they didn't die. And there's also something else too. You can imagine what the Spanish and other Europeans felt. I must be special. I'm alive and they're not. So you're going to get a lot, or you really start seeing the beginnings of what's going to become racism. So with that, you're going to have conquistadors going all over the place. And just to tell you a couple stories really quick, we have Balboa. He came down here across the Isthmus of Panama. By the way, he was quite surprised. He crossed right here. And you notice you cross here, the water looks south. He's here, and look at the bay open up to the south. So he thought the ocean must be south. So he dubbed this the South Seas. And that's why to this day, you'll get people calling the Pacific Ocean the South Seas. Even though, no, it's wrong. So that's where it comes from. A couple of ones, for example, Ponce de Leon, he went to Florida. And he was best known for looking for the fountain of youth. The thought was, and this story, they did the same thing in Africa. There's stories about this, give you perpetual life. But let's be clear what he was really looking for. He was looking for gold and slaves. He was on a slave hunting expedition. And we'll come back to that. Let me get to another one here. De Soto. De Soto landed here with a few hundred men, and also they brought their own refrigeration, aka a bunch of pigs they ran with them so they could kill if they went for their food. So they brought their rations with them, and they went through this entire area and fought battle after battle when they encountered villages of thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people in the various tribes, from the Choctaws all the way to Cahokia right here. And they went through fought battle after battle. I mean, just a brutal fight all the way across where the remnants finally made it back to here. They were basically ran out. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because when Champlain came down here for the French 100 years later, anybody want to guess what he found? Remember I told you there were thousands? They're all gone. When Coronado went through here, they killed virtually everybody. Remember I told you about the pigs? Why would I mention that? Smallpox. I'm sorry, not smallpox. Measles. The pigs had measles. That's where that, and they just spread, the pigs just spread like wildfire. And so the Soda wrote about massive villages and thousands of people. The French wrote about pristine forests and no one living there. Had to be just, it's so weird to think about it. So we're talking literally millions of people dying. You saw the same thing, remember I told you about the fishermen? They're spreading diseases too. And the diseases just spreading like wildfire. So all the diseases spread through here. One more person I'll tell you about is Coronado, and he went looking for the 7 cities of gold, and he went all through this area. Now there's not near as many American Indians because it's dry there, but they still encountered a lot, and they would give them a claim to an important city here called Santa Fe. Big important city for New Spain. Or New Spain. But that is a few things about this, so let's get to one big discovery down here in what is present-day Peru, the town of Potosi. Potosi will be discovered in about 1540. And it's this mountain. And here's a picture of this mountain. And we're talking up here about 11,000 feet, and the mountain's about 14,000 feet. So a lot of people went there would suffer from elevation sickness. Have you ever been up that high? Has anyone been up that high? You ever climb a mountain? That's just, I mean, it's a terrible headache. It's pretty hard. It takes a long time to get acclimated, and you never do. I mean, I spent a few times at areas over 9,000 feet for a week, and I had a headache the whole time. So I can't even imagine here, elevation sickness. Mountain climbers get that, lack of oxygen, all that kind of stuff. But here is a very pixelated drawing of the mines here. This hill, at first they found very rich ore of gold, but then they found veins of silver and more silver than they ever saw before. Potosi became the richest hill of the world. So right here, Peru and Bolivia, right here. In fact, they would fight a war over that called the Pacific War. That's what it looks like today. But they pulled out so much gold and silver. In fact, a quarter of the entire treasury of the massive empire, Charles V of Spain, and that's all of New Spain, and all of the Holy Roman Empire, and Spain. A quarter of it came from this hill alone. And they enslaved thousands of various American Indians, so various of the tribes along here, and they brought other slaves in here, and they worked them to death, gold and silver. And this totally destabilized the entire economic system of the world, as they brought all of this gold and silver back. But they would get it here. Some would go west and go immediately trade with China. Some would make its way up to here. And that actually was a big deal. They passed laws to keep it from going west, but we have too much money in there. We're gone. They're in Madrid. Well, how could the king stop us? But then massive treasure fleets would form here and take it back to Spain. Please be the right tip. Yeah. So massive. Look, I spell pirates. Pirates. Massive treasure fleets would form there with galleons, and they'd sail across the Atlantic with all of this gold. And enemies of Spain, they would hire pirates, or as I call them here, pirates. And that is why, you can imagine the Caribbean with all the islands, little inlets and jungles and places to find, perfect place for pirates. So there's going to be pirates all around here. In fact, these were the big treasure ports. And so Spanish galleons being captured by pirates, and this is going to lead to war between Spain and Britain, etc. Treasure fleets. But all of this gold and silver will fuel imperial competition. And the reason I put that out is, what you're going to have is you're going to have all these other places that want a piece of the action. They want their own gold. And look at the amount of gold from Spanish America. This basically doubled the money supply in Europe. And it's going to create inflation. Prices are going to go up. But ironically, the graveyard for almost all of this gold, it would go back to Spain. Spain would use it to fund wars. Spain would use it as collateral to borrow money to fight wars. But eventually, they use a lot of this debt. They use the gold as collateral for debt. say, hey, we're going to get more money, and Spain would borrow even more. And they would fight wars, and what would kill Spain is they couldn't pay back their debt because they didn't have any gold anymore. But the big thing is, ironically, so much of this gold would end up in China. The graveyard of gold and silver. In fact, Chinese currency was either copper rings or silver. Not currency, I'm sorry, Chinese coins. Their money, everything with coins per se. But China had all those things they wanted, whether it be spices or the big one, silk. All of a sudden, silk became more important than anything. And tea, rubies, etc. And they all went to China. And so that became the graveyard of all this gold. I have just a little bit of finish. Oh, it's been longer than I thought, so I'll finish this real quick tomorrow. And then we'll get to the Reformation and go from there. We are going to watch one of those Day of the Universe change. Did I get your maps, or do you have them?
I still have mine.
Turn in we go. And then now I got to pick this up. Oh, the work I do for you people.
Thank you.
Oh, this is beautiful. Okay,
Mr. Partridge.
Yes.
So if Spain already had gold, why did it need to borrow money?
I know this sounds counterintuitive, but when they had the gold, the thought was, okay, we're going to get more gold, so let's expand our empire more. Now it is time to attack our enemies, to attack the Ottomans, to attack the French, which required more money than what they have. But they figured, well, we're always going to have gold, so we'll use that as collateral. And you'll see this a lot. This happens in history to this day, where people who are incredibly rich, when they realize, oh, I can make more money, I'll use the money I have now as collateral. Have a great day.
Quiz drop. Mr. Partridge.
Yeah.
Did the quiz drop?
Nope, I'm going to drop it. I've got about 2 more questions to finish. I'm trying to finish it after 6th period.
Okie doke. Have a good day.
You too. We'll see you.